Hey guys, thanks for joining. Feel free to comment on the YouTube live chat throughout the whole session. Feel free to ask questions. By the way, I've pinned a message on there that says if you post your favorite quote from the session, just be sure to tag Walt, myself, and Disclosed, and we want to have an offline conversation with you. Curious to know what cool things you're able to draw out from this conversation such that it's implementable or actionable for your job seeking process. So that's the goal today. But before we start, I actually have in plan at the 15-minute mark, we'll go through the meat of today's resume review. But before then, Walt, maybe introduce yourself personally. What do you do? What are you excited for your upcoming vacation plans? If you don't, that's okay. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Hi, everybody. My name is Walt. I've been at Facebook for the last 5 or so years now, primarily doing industry hires for recruiting, which means like, hey, you've generally got some experience under your belt versus early career talent, right? So someone who is about a year or less out of school. Outside of that, primarily supporting product management and a few other functions as well. In terms of previously before Facebook, which feels so long ago, Facebook is the longest employee/employer relationship I've had. So before that, I was recruiting also, but just at a few different companies in the San Francisco Bay Area for those who aren't local. So that said, in terms of vacation and what I look forward to, so I'm going to Hawaii in about 2-3 weeks. It is my friend's wedding. 2 of my very close friends that I've known for, I don't know, maybe about half of my life. Yeah, a good half of my life. They're getting married, so it's pretty big. Super excited. I've never done a destination wedding before, so like this, it's I'm going to Hawaii, so there's a lot of emotions. I've been to Hawaii once before, but it's a different island, so looking forward to just doing what locals do, eating a lot of Hawaiian food, and hopefully getting to see some sights and just partying with a lot of people. So I'm super excited.
That's awesome, Walt. Hey Roberto, hey Maria, thanks for joining again. Seems like you two are always coming to our sessions and we really do appreciate that. About Hawaii, I haven't been there yet, and I am local to the West Coast and I kind of regret not going, but I feel like it's something I need to go. Yeah, I do. Yeah. I do.
It is a very, I don't know if you've traveled to other like island like things like Bora Bora or anything like that, but I think Hawaii is quite unique for me as an individual in the sense that, hey, well, first and foremost, like you can get around because it's like a English speaking country, so that's great. 2, it's very interesting in the sense that it's not that large as an island. Like you can, drive around it, take a day or half a day really to go do it. And I think the weather of where it's at, like rain feels warm. Like I've never had that kind of experience anywhere else where like if it rains, like you can walk in rain and you're not like dismayed by it, or you're not like thrown off guard. It feels good. Like it's really weird to say that, but like yeah. Plus, I mean, beaches are clear, right? The water is clear. They've also have a very touristy type of thing where they've set it up where like, you can enjoy yourself on the beach, have a couple of drinks, and it's good, so.
Are you a fan of poke?
I love poke.
Oh my gosh, you were there, right there. By the way, people are jealous. I think, should we move away from vacation planning and move to something more boring? You are jealous on here.
Sure. I mean, look, for full context, like this wedding was pushed out a year ago due to COVID. So like, I get it. Like, I'm sure everybody wants to travel too. We were almost, in some ways this could have been like a virtual like Zoom wedding, which would have been equally cool. I've never done one of those, but I hear you.
Oh yeah, we just attended a Zoom wedding. It was quite short. By the way, it was like 15 minutes, and right when they said I do, I now pronounce you husband and wife, they closed the call. And I was like, that's weird. Feels really
Wow.
odd. They were like, they wanted to be small and like close knit, but they also didn't want the. I don't know. It was a little odd, but honestly, they're gonna have a reception and it'll be a whole thing afterwards. But they wanted to get it through.
As long as they have the reception, right? Like that's really what you look forward to, right? I think like as attendees and as people getting married, I think it's like, hey, you do the ceremony for formality's sake, right? But like the reception is like, all right, we get to celebrate with all of our friends and family, and like that I think most people look forward to. But equally so, I get it. Like I think with Zoom weddings, because you don't get to celebrate, I think in that manner, it very well come. I mean, I guess it could be very cut and dry, but hey, I don't know.
Yeah. We have, speaking of vacation, we have a flight booked for Ithaca, New York. So, ooh. East Coast guys, hit me up if you guys are on the East Coast. But we wanted to go there to visit our alma mater together, and it's also my sister-in-law's graduation, formal graduation that's been postponed for like a year. But wow. I know we're gonna do some wine tours, wine tasting. I haven't booked it yet, but we will do that. And I'm super excited. I'm really excited for the wine tasting. So more like cider tasting for me, if I'm completely honest.
There's nothing wrong with cider tasting. No. Hey, I'm grown.
I would go to bars and I would ask them, what's the sweetest beer you have on tap? I don't care what it is. What is the absolute sweetest? And I would just drink it like juice.
There's...
Dangerous. I know, dangerous, guys. Everyone's like, oh, don't do that. Rule number one.
Well, as a former bartender in another life, right, sugar is one of the biggest contributors to hangovers. Right, so like that's the only thing I personally would caution you against. But like, hey,
previous bartender. Ooh, tell me about that experience.
Well, previous to Facebook, I and even during, up until my first year of Facebook, I worked in the food and beverage industry and like restaurants for to pay for school, honestly. And I started off, flipping burgers at 15, and pretty much when I was in school, worked at an Italian restaurant, and then a little bit before I left school, I started getting into bartending. So outside of that, I bartended for quite some time. It was great. It's a fun thing to do for anyone who's on the call. If you've never done like a customer service type of thing, I know like retail is not the best thing, but even that, I think it's a very humble experience of like what work is. And then if you get to do the fun stuff, I think I think the food and beverage industry is like a very unique place of very different personalities who are very just like open, and like they just there is like a very true sense of the nature of like pirate and swashbuckling. Like it gets pretty nuts. But that being said, bartending in San Francisco was fantastic.
Ooh,
it was.
We have a couple of questions from the chat, by the way. First of all, hey Sydney, Cornellians, let's go. Second thing, Maria's asking, what's your favorite drink?
Ooh, my favorite drink. I mean, of course, it depends on the mood and it depends on the type of liquor. If I'm feeling very fancy about myself and I want to celebrate, there was the young me would be like, hey, let's just do some nice champagne and hold the OJ, and just keep that going. I know, right? You don't need those vitamins. But older me is like, a French 75 is really classic and nice. It's just like a little bit of vodka, right, with a little bit of lemon juice and champagne. It's just like if you imagine fortified champagne with a little extra pizzazz, like that, like definitely gets you going. If I'm really in the mood for like hard liquor, I generally like to have just something on the rocks, something very simple. After making a lot of cocktails, like unless it's, I would say, alcohol spirit forward, I try not to drink it just because, again, like I don't want to get a hangover, like, but yeah, I'm pretty like, this is gonna sound basic, but like I really like classic drinks. So I'm a huge fan of like, hey, your good old old fashions, Manhattans, even like gimlets. Like I'm
Ooh.
not opposed to gin, but it's not like my favorite. But yeah, I'll have it. It's good.
Oh, there was one time, Maria, I see your question. Outside of my cider obsession, I like GNTs.
Okay.
I
Okay.
know, so basic as well. But I went to a
No.
GNT bar in the UK, and that was, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely gorgeous with rosé gin and nice tonic and a bit of lime juice. You got me
Mm-hmm.
there. Um,
I hear
and
you on that.
Roberto's
That's
asking, what's your favorite Italian food? He's Italian and he won't judge.
oh no judgment. That's good.
No judgment. That's good.
That's good. That's good. That's good. So for Italian food, I'm a huge fan of just like again simple stuff. I like aglio and olio, just like oil, garlic and oil, right, with a little bit of chili flake is perfect. Like that's like simple. Like you can't if you screw it up. Like I generally think like that's not so good. But it's like it's very hard not to mess it up, or in my opinion, it's not
Yeah.
hard to mess it up. But outside of that, I'm a huge fan of um, well, it is a dish that I learned when I was working at an Italian restaurant, but it's like a tomato cream sauce with peas, pancetta, and mushrooms. I don't know, like at the restaurant we call it rigatoni San Giovanella. I don't know if that is like based off of a traditional dish or not, but that's like my favorite dish
Oh,
because
Roberto's
like
like, yes. When you talked about the simple stuff, if they can't do the simple stuff right, then chances are,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you know what I mean. But
yeah,
it's kind of like it's well I think it also depends on like what or how you like to you know ask about quality of a restaurant, right? Like if you like even like small stuff, right? When you go to a fancy restaurant like bread and butter, like
right,
hey, if this doesn't taste great, like I don't like if you don't invest into the small things, right? Like the small
yeah.
stuffs are what lead up to the big things. So,
Oh
but that's
yeah,
just a personal preference.
for sure, for sure. Conscious of time, I know we have a minute left, guys. So we are going to start at the 15-minute mark. For those who just joined, don't worry, we're not going to talk about life, even though it's super fun. And I would love to talk about food and vacation all day with Walt. But you guys are here so that you guys can have an easier process through the job seeking process, and that's why we've invited Walt to give us an insider's view as to what he sees from resumes, to give you guys perspectives as to what goes behind the scenes. So we are at the 15-minute mark. I'll get started. Typically, how I like to get started is with the 3 disclaimers. So the first one, I'm going to pull up my disclaimers here, is one, advice is endorsed by the individual and not by the companies he's represented or he's currently representing. Second, this is a safe space for learning, so please, no association with any personal attacks. We are here to critique anonymized resumes, and this doesn't mean you are a bad person for applying to a product management position. These are ways for you to get real feedback without being in the hot seat of being evaluated. Third, it's instead of a disclaimer, I'll tell you a bit more about why Walt is chosen. He's chosen here and here today with us because he believes in giving that opportunity to students or to aspiring folks trying to enter into the workforce with his perspective, his own personal perspectives to get you through the process. He's been a critical stakeholder as well through his many years, through his experience. He's been a critical stakeholder to bring candidates into his respective company. So we want to draw in some of those insights, the process of how he reviews resumes, what he's able to draw out from, a 1-pager or 2-pager. We're also going to be able to understand, well, how long does Walt take, how long does Walt get a feel for candidacy as well? So how long does he take to review resumes if it's in the stack for one position? We'll walk through this hopefully today. And by the way, for those who didn't see the pinned message on YouTube Live, please post a quote, your favorite quote from this session on LinkedIn. Just be sure to tag Disclosed, myself, and Walt, and we'll have an offline conversation after which we'll try to get you a one-on-one with Walt, myself, or with Disclosed. So be sure to do that. We'll randomly choose someone for that one-on-one discussion. All right, that is a mouthful, but I will be pulling questions from the chat, so be sure to ask your questions there. Well, would you like to give, I know you gave a quick introduction of yourself at the 4 o'clock mark, but would you be able to give another introduction of yourself for folks who just joined?
No problem. Hello for everyone who has just joined. My name is Walt. I've been at Facebook for the last 5 years supporting industry hiring for Facebook, primarily for product management, but also other functions as well. Industry recruiting just means that it is not early career talent. So what you generally think of as like, hey, university talent, or ideally like maybe 1 or 2 years out of school. Outside of that, that's kind of what I've done for the last 5 years. And then of course, previously I've recruited for other companies, previously to Facebook for the last, before that, primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Cool. Well, great to meet you. I think everyone in the chat is excited to meet you too, and excited for the resumes that we're going to be screening today. Can you walk me through how, so one of the things that has been recently popping up in my newsfeed is the Facebook RPM rotational program for product managers. Can you tell me more about that program? I know you're not going to be a representative of it, but what do you know about it? Just kind of drawing your insights from what you've seen.
I would arguably say RPM is one of the best programs that someone has actually thought of, done, and run. It's an amazing program. So for those on the line that aren't familiar, right, RPM at Facebook is a little different than the other types of rotational programs that other folks have, right? Like Intuit has an amazing one, but it's like a 2-year stint across a variety of different disciplines. And then you have things like Google APM program, which is a little synonymous, I think, with Facebook's RPM program. You have the Yahoo APM program and a few other rotational programs. In particular for Facebook, the RPM program is 3 6-month rotations across a variety of products. And it is generally more geared towards, I would say, early career and talent folks, but folks who are even middle of their careers who want to switch into product management are always, of course, welcome to apply. The foundation of it being like, hey, as long as you don't have more than 1 year's worth of product management experience, go ahead and apply. And the very cool thing about it is it has probably produced some of the best PMs at Facebook that I personally know of. They're all incredibly smart, bright, but they've also done so many diverse things in their background. In of itself, the program itself is incredibly diverse. The makeup of it generally is what you would not expect. Yeah. So
interesting. What is something, I guess, what is considered part of the expected, or the folks who come in? I guess expectations, I'm presuming 4-year university in computer science and they pivot into product management. Would that be something that's within the expectation role, or?
Funnily enough, Facebook is one of very few places that does not require a CS degree to be a PM across the board. Yeah. So in this program, or at least even in the RPM program, it's not an expectation. Hey, that, I think that at Facebook, we have in many ways found that, hey, it's, of course, we have those types of archetypes or those people who have those backgrounds, but, we also have again, right, to your point of diversity, right? We also have a lot of people who don't have those backgrounds who are also equally very successful at Facebook.
Cool. Excited for that. Guys, feel free to add any questions around the Facebook RPM program or Facebook in general or Walt's experience. We're going to draw in some of the questions there, so feel free to add a bit of context and questions there. But I want to get through the meat of today's resume review. So Walt, would you be able to share your screen on the anonymized resumes for today's session? And for folks who just joined, by the way, while Walt is sharing his screen, what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate up to 4 resumes today. Walt has not seen these resumes before, so it's literally his first time looking through them. and we'll take a look at what he sees, what he notices, and what he kind of keeps in mind as he's filtering through these resumes.
Cool. Can you see this now? I just want to make sure, no technical glitches. All right.
Yeah.
For folks on the line, even though it's been a year and a half or so since COVID, I still have problems muting and unmuting, so I apologize. It's, these are technology problems. All right, so first resume up. What am I looking at? Cool.
So this one seems like so I'm gonna make a couple of assumptions just so we can frame today's these types of resumes properly. I'm gonna presume that this person is gonna go for an early career professional, like either an internship or a full-time position that requires a master's degree. Let's just say early career professional experience.
Cool. All right. So with all of that said in that framing, right off the top, hey, formatting seems good. List out the most or the highest level of education first, expected May 2022. Okay. HBS, UMass.
Awesome.
Biology honors. That's great. I wish I graduated with honors. That definitely didn't happen. MBA. It's true. I
love
wish.
These comments there. I'm like, yeah, I didn't do that, but I love these candidates.
Hey, much more. I wasn't the greatest individual at school. Okay, professional experience. All right, university research analyst, researching data analytics, new strategy. Okay, fantastic. Consulting, ed tech. Oh, that's really interesting.
So it seems like, can I make comments as you're going through the resume?
Sure. I'm sorry. If you don't want me to, I'm happy to awesome. Speak out loud, but whatever works best.
No, this is awesome, Walt. So I just want to make a comment really quickly. Walt probably spent 30 seconds and he just went through this resume, by the way. He's pretty much gone through everything, and it seems like he tries to get a feel for the job position and where they've been. I don't think you've looked through the bullet points yet, right? It seems like you've skimmed the titles, essentially.
That's right.
Gotcha.
That's right. The way if you think about it, if you abstract a lot of things, right? Like what people generally, their eyes, catch towards, or at least what we're generally trained to do is hey, education, right? The types of roles that you've held, and then with an early career background, you're looking at anything additional, in this case, leadership experience, right? Once you have a general sense of that and the types of things that the individual may have explored, if it's more singular, and what I mean by singular is they've generally had a very similar track of internships or jobs, et cetera, right? You can have a traditional, hey, someone who graduates with a CS degree who then does 4 to 5 different internships as a software engineer, right? That's great. Or it can be very different in the sense of hey, I have that same background in education, but I've done a variety of things, whether it's hey, I've tried marketing, some kind of business type role, and then I've also done engineering, or pure software engineering is also the types of things that you want to understand as an individual, right? Hey, it's not to say one is better than the other, but more so of just a better understanding of the types of skill sets that this individual may have. In this case, it sounds like for the most part, this individual has generally been, I would say, more on the business side / more, I would say, analytical side, like a blend of the two. So a lot of analytical work plus some marketing work plus business type-esque things. And then, of course, the wonderful thing here is hey, they've done some amazing leadership stuff on their spare time.
Yeah. Really cool. One of the things I've also noted through walking through their professional experience, although it seems quite there's a lot of movement here. There's market research, there's a founder, there's business development consultant, and then research with the hospital in Boston. It seems like it's kind of mixed. So in terms of my projection of them, although it seems like it's kind of all throughout the place, it makes sense with their education. The fact that you've mentioned biology, they were studying biology. Yep. They realized this might not be the right place for them. They moved into other business realms. I think that's okay, personally.
Right. And to your point around, following the trajectory of education, right? These were things that they probably worked on during their bachelor's or their master's, right? They explored these areas. They're like, hey, great stuff. Maybe I want to try something else or move on to something else because I'm not quite there yet on what I want to do, or at least like finding what they want to do in their career. Totally fine. I also read this, I'm not always as worried around short stints, because I generally, expect like, hey, some of these things might be internships, some of these things might be part-time to begin with. So not terribly like one way or the other around it. I think the nice thing here is they also listed like they're a consultant. So given that, I assume most of these things were also a part-time consultant basis. And then, the actual full-time role that they held was at San Diego State. So.
Yeah. One of the, I guess, not misconceptions, one of the stigma with moving around a lot is, are you committed to whatever you're involved in? So seeing a lot of, I've just overheard some folks are quite worried that, they've had positions every 6 months. I'm kind of worried that, what's going on. But one of the biggest takes I've seen from this resume, although they have short stints, the PTPRS consulting, they've been able to manage it for 4 years. So it shows that they can be committed to something. And that's actually something that's good that might be quite unique to the resume. You've also mentioned, Walt, earlier on, for the Facebook RPM program, and maybe in your general experience, you don't look for traditional backgrounds. And would you say this is part of that traditional background category or something different?
Yeah, it's not to say that we don't look at traditional backgrounds. I would say that we've done a very good job of bringing diversity into the program. Like, look, I'm not saying a traditional background won't work, right? It's just a matter of considering it, and I think we do that equally. But I think we at Facebook are, one of the tenets that we really are striving to achieve is diversity. So trying to make sure that, hey, it's not just diversity of thought, but diversity in background and what you can consider is pretty great for that. And in regards to this background, do I think it's traditional or not? I mean, in a way, yes, in a way, no, right? I think in a way, yes, is because what you kind of consider as, hey, what you learned in school and you go apply it, that's traditional, right? And that's what you kind of see here. What I don't think is as traditional is like, hey, I think it is a little bit more rare to see someone who is generally like, who is trained in science to then go get an MBA. That's pretty different, right? Yeah. It's not as, I would say, and what I mean, for clarity's sake here, what I mean by science, I mean like biological science or like, chemistry or something, and then going getting your MBA is like a little atypical than maybe, getting your master's, in say chemistry or biology or whatnot. So. Gotcha. Yeah.
Thanks for elaborating on that. We have a couple of questions from the chat. From Sydney, is it a disadvantage if you've tried a myriad of things early in your career? So you've like done a couple of internships and then What if they're like, to Maria's point, what if it's non-relevant though? It's like non-relevant work history. Let's say it's, for example, bartending, right? It's non-relevant, but what do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, this one's probably a more tough one to answer. I think when you think about crafting your resume, right, the goal is to provide things that are most relevant, right, to what you're applying for, right? Of course, I don't think it's wrong or I don't think it's bad to have tried a lot of things, right? Like that's what you do when you're, not just in college, but even afterwards, right? Like, it's very rare for, I think, someone like myself who actually fell into recruiting and ended up staying with it for so long. That's, I think, very atypical. Most folks will have tried, like, say, if they are in that kind of realm, right, are like, hey, they've probably tried sales, recruiting, biz dev, like many different types of roles that are similar, but, end up doing something like, different, right? That happens. I just think it's more about what you want to showcase in your resume, because again, right, you're like ideally within a page 2, that's really about it. As for folks who think it's, the time change or like staying in a role, is that good or bad, under a year and things like that, a lot of that I think is framing.
Yeah.
Right. If it's an internship, I don't expect it to be more than 6 months, right? Or a summer or whatnot, right? Showing commitment is different in many ways. And the other piece is like, hey, you're also discovering this for yourself, right? I would probably question a little bit more if you were like someone like me, like probably, mid-career making multiple shifts. Like at that point, I'm like, okay, I would want to understand more and why, but do I think that's like negative? No, I don't, because everybody has their own story to tell.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Walt. And I do appreciate the question, Maria, on non-relevant work experience. Honestly, the thing is, I guess it also depends on the position as well. If you have 5 years of work experience in an unrelated field and you want to go into a product and a mid-stage product management experience, it might be a bit tough because you don't have product management in your pocket. But if you want to get your feet wet with product management experience through the rotational program, go for it. I think that's quite valid for you to have non-related work experience. Do you have, and to your point, you just, for the rotational program, you could have non-related work experience.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely. And I think that makes it quite diverse too. I personally like working with product managers who can understand where I'm coming from if they've been to different roles, if they've worked with salespeople, if they've worked with engineers. I have a better respect for product managers as opposed to someone who just entered. But that's just my personal opinion. So thanks for the question, Maria. I see a lot of other questions on there. Kurti, I see your question. Roberto, Kevin. I see your comments and question. Kevin, we're excited to have you as well. How about we move on to the second resume? And Kirti and Roberto, I'll touch upon your questions in the second resume.
All right, moving on to resume number 2. I think, well, as we recap the first resume, just as a quick overview, like, hey, great resume. I think well written, pretty straightforward in what you're trying to communicate. They employed what I call like the top 3 things about what they are trying to do in each role, which is fantastic, and overall read well. So yeah, it's something,
Back up on that. What is the top 3 things per role? Do you mean the 3 bullet points, or is it?
Yeah, that's right. Like, they had like a quick, like, I'm very big on like, hey, short and sweet. So, hey, top 3 things you want to list that you think are relevant, that you want to highlight, and they did it for each for the most part. It's great, right? Again, in this case, you had a page to communicate what you wanted. And at least from my understanding, I have a pretty good sense of what they've done in their role and what they're looking for.
Awesome. Thanks for elaborating on that.
All right. Resume number 2. Again, education at the top. I don't know. INSEAD? Oh, I really apologize if I butchered that. Okay, MBA, Cornell. All right. Another information science, minor in business. Okay, very cool. Alrighty. Oh wait, when did they? Okay, 2021. So just graduated. CenturyLink. Alrighty. Data science. 200 global telecom. Oh wow, that's a lot of employees. Alrighty, very cool.
Do you like that though, Walt? If they describe the company, if it might not be big enough, is that okay?
To be really honest, I appreciate it because it gives me like, for me, as like, if you can, that's great. If you can't, I totally get it, right? Like, because I'm not going to be familiar with every company is out in the world, but that's great. I was like, wow, Fortune 200, that's it, like, if you think about it, right, like having some kind of framing of what the company does and like where they are in the relationship with things is always good.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. And then see part-time, thank you for labeling. I'm very familiar with Chegg. Okay. Oh, technical coach. Cool. And then patient ping. Startup, created engineer. Okie dokie. Before that, engineer again on computational biology. Wow, that sounds really difficult. Okay, cool. And then a few roles before that, engineering. Cool. Additional information. All right. Oh, okay. Nationalization, work authorization, languages, entrepreneurship, social impact. Oh, this is really cool. Okay. Don't really understand all of it, but I will take it in stride. All right. Soccer analytics. What does that mean? Okay. Is that
I don't
like,
think I see that. Where are you under?
Right here under interests.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Is that is that like baseball stats and just knowing them really well, or like are they like predicting and betting on like soccer matches and
Betting? Oh, I want
individuals?
to know this person.
You know what I mean?
I know.
I was like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so as a quick summary for this, before we get into those more questions, so this is what I kind of read. This is your background of like, hey, someone who is probably, I think, you know, when we're talking about like the traditional background of like a scientist turned MBA, like this is probably more of like a software engineer turned MBA graduate, or like along that path, right? You know, some folks do it. And it's, I think, maybe more prevalent in tech, right? Like this actually would be your quintessential PM profile, right? Someone who has a technical background by nature, has an MBA, you know, who wants to move into representing the business, right? From a technical standpoint. Outside of that, I think most importantly, like, hey, they've done some really interesting things in their career, generally like health tech, right? It seems like being socially or social impact driven is a large part of their background. They've had a few different roles, generally engineering given. I don't really hold too much around like how long they've been in their roles. It generally seems like a year or two, right? I think in tech, that's okay, you know? Other industries might say not so great, but for me, I'm like, meh. And then of course, well, I mean, you see more movement in tech. Outside of that, I think most recently with, you know, data science, right? As you can tell, their actual work experience kind of ends around the 2019-ish barrier because they've gone and done their MBA. But overall, like, hey, some really interesting stuff. I like the software engineering plus data science. I think that's like, hey, two very different types of things. Clearly, they've moved their career in that direction. But yeah, that's my quick summary.
Awesome. One of the things I'd like to add, and it's just a thing I guess I'm picky with, is I would like the dates to be closer to the position, just because I feel like I like go back and forth a lot, and that's me. I just got lost like 2 times.
Like formatting.
Yeah, the formatting.
I see.
Especially when you get to thinkful, patient paying, and the foundational medicine, it's kind of hard to like go back and forth. And then I realized that it's not linear. So it goes from 2015 to 2020 and then back to 2019. So I took that in mind in terms of their trajectory. That's something that I just took a note of. It's not going to make or break. What do you think about the font? This was something, as we're going through the resumes, when you go through stacks of resumes and you see this one, is it okay to have this type of format?
I think so. I think, you know, some of your points are well taken in terms of like formatting and how you want to do it. I think if there's anything else, I would be mindful of like where they spent the most of their time. Like, well, I think this is like very synonymous with like when you have short stints versus long stints. The longer you stay at a place, you tend to like write more. Yeah. When you don't necessarily stay at a place for too long, like as you can tell, you don't write as much, right? I think that's just an implicit thing. I would try to do my best to try and even it a little bit, or like to the best of my ability, right? And try to, you know, at least articulate more. But that being said, it's just like it's a small nit more than anything else. But no, I mean the font is fine, right? I'm thankful that some people like do what they did, which is like bold things, right? I agree. Like chronological order is nice, right? But it's also just like, well, you know, it's kind of it's nice. It doesn't always have to be like I kind of read it fine, but you know, it's different, right?
Yeah. Let's take a couple questions from the chat. The first question I have for you from Roberto: would you eliminate any non-business relevant experience and add more bullet points on the business positions if you're applying for, let's say, a product management experience? So like, should I sacrifice some of the non-work experience for more relevant experience? How would I go about that?
Oh, this is a good trade-off question. This one's really hard for me to speak to because I don't know what the non-relevant thing is. If I, you know, like it's to make like a sweeping generalization of that is difficult. I would say use your best judgment, right? It's more of a I'm going to make a few assumptions here. 1, you're only using 1 page as a resume. 2, you've already listed out like your education, which takes up a couple of spaces, right? 3, you've probably listed out both what we would consider relevant and non-relevant information. In those if that is the case, in that instance, I would say, hey, use your best judgment, because what you feel may be non-relevant isn't necessarily always the case, right? You just want to double check on that. But let's just say if it's very, very like opposite, right? Like let's just say, I don't know, like what's non-relevant to PM? I think a lot of things are relevant to PM. Let's just say if it is like, in the sense of like, hey, it's online operations, right? And like a very operational heavy role, and like the PM role that you're applying for is like very technical, let's just say, right? If that's the case, right, is it as relevant? Probably not, but I would still include it because there is some context to be gained, because online ops, as we all know, is user-centric and heavy, and that can influence something, right? I think it really depends on the framing, but use your best judgment is what I would say, without knowing more about like the context.
Yeah, great response. I know that there's not a lot of context around that question. Roberto, feel free to just have an example of what would be considered non-relevant, and we can tackle that question in a bit. Kirti is asking, if I want to apply for a product management role, what are some of the few things that are important to get my resume shortlisted? And I want to pivot that. Maybe instead of focusing on what would get shortlisted, what are the reasons, and this is kind of a brainstorm activity between you and me. What would be the reasons where it might, you would kind of like raise your eyebrows and ask yourself, I don't think this is relevant?
Things that I don't think are relevant, maybe, and shortlisting a resume. Okay, so for those on the line, right, because you are probably very interested in RPM, as we've talked about it quite a bit. So for RPM, there is a call out I'd like to make here, which is, hey, we don't actually do anything in regards to shortlisting a resume, right? Or like a referrals program for RPM. It's purely applications. So you just apply and that's it. There's no like way to shortlist it per se, outside of like an individual like reviewing it, like myself or one of my team members at Facebook, right? To then think about whether or not the resume is relevant to the program, or at least your candidacy rather. In regards to things that I don't think would be as relevant to RPM,
it's hard because it's so diverse, and you're looking for diverse experiences. And I feel, maybe we'll tackle it in the next resume, by the way, just because we're at the 45-minute mark. I'm so bad at time management, guys, clearly. But I'm doing my best. We'll get through this before the 5 o'clock mark, and we'll spend a couple of minutes not ranking, but saying yay or nay for the resumes. Okay.
Well, let's get to this last one here. Okay. Cool. PhD, UMich, ECE. Alrighty. Currently there. Alrighty. Programming language. Research experience. Research assistant. Maryland. Alrighty. Very engineering heavy, and then industry experience, internships, intern teaching experience. Okay. Honors and awards. All right. Presentations. Okay. Professional organizations. Alrighty. So a 3-pager. All right. So I'm going to do this quickly because I know we've been short on time, and I apologize for taking a long time. So what I would probably say here is simply this. I would ideally like this to be 2 pages. I think a lot of this is great experience, but if there was a way to make this 2 pages, I think you could. I don't know, because I'm not as familiar with PhD hiring, I don't know what would be helpful to potentially reduce or like focus on, which is a little harder. I think there is something to be said about education in the sense of like, in this particular individual, they've only listed their PhD candidacy. I am actually interested in what they've done, like where they got their master's or their undergraduate, just as like a continuity piece. I assume it's probably from University of Maryland because that's where they did some of their research assistants and was a embedded systems programmer. And then potentially, that's pretty much what I would say there. And then I think in my mind, I think there's an order of preference of what I would like listed personally. So what I mean by that is, hey, they've listed research experience first, like skills second, right? Usually I would prefer skills last. Like I want to focus on the meat of like what you can describe to me. So what that generally means is like, hey, like research experience or work experience or any kind of project that you want me to read through, right? Don't get me wrong, skills are important, but I don't know if I would like focal point that up top, because generally the types of things that you have listed in your skills are generally also communicated through research experience, right? Or like you can kind of infer that. Outside of, like if I would just honestly say, hey, again, right, with the caveat that I don't look at PhD resumes all that often. It's like, hey, just like this, just the organization model. And then like, hey, if you could make this a little bit more, I think, crisp in like what you want to communicate, that would be it. But overall, hey, like that's about it.
What do you mean by crisp? Do you mean tailoring the resume a bit? Because it seems like the pathway is quite convoluted, or
I think it's just like picking and choosing what you want to highlight above all else, because a lot of it is like listing everything I think this individual has probably done, right? Again, right, research experience, teaching experience, industry experience, honors and awards, presentations, right? Again, with the caveat of like, hey, I'm not familiar with a PhD like resume, like maybe that's what they all do. Maybe that is the industry standard. I would just say like, hey, if there's a way to combine it, again, right, make it more of a focal point of what you're trying to highlight and what you're trying to, go after. That's what I would probably think of as a point of reference here, because it's just, if I, in some ways it's just a lot to interpret, whereas like I'm trying to look for more like focal points of like, okay, education, what have you really done? What are you trying to go after? And what is the outcome of what you want me to get out of your resume, right? Like,
Gotcha. Oh, lovely. I know there's a couple more questions from the chat, but I want to touch upon the 3-page resume. You mentioned that you need to truncate it to 2-page, make it a bit more tailored for the position that you're looking for. Especially, okay, well, they know that you're from Facebook. So they know they're trying to gun for a role at Facebook, let's say.
Sure.
One of the things that I might be thinking about is, well, how might be atmospheric pollutants through image analysis be relevant? That's probably one of my first thoughts. Is it just a 3-pager of all your experiences, or are you trying to sell yourself? I think that's the two things. And remember...
sorry.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Sorry.
Can folks see on the YouTube oh my gosh, I'm so old. Can folks see on YouTube if you're able to see the words? By the way, just let me know and we can have it like zoomed in or zoomed out. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, and this is something I like go back and forth between, is should you put industry first or about your research projects? And I think it has to do with how relevant is each of those sections to the position you're applying for. So for example, if your research is on atmospheric pollutants, but you did that the most recent, like that was your most recent experience, I would consider thinking about what you want to make more relevant first, so that it's kind of like when you're reading a book and you're like, okay, well, this isn't related to me. You like look through the cover and you're like, this might not be related to me, and you start to have a notion where, am I going to get useful information out of this? That's especially since, Walt, you probably spend how long per resume generally on a ballpark? Well, let's say 2 days, you have to review resumes. How many resumes do you get through from that stack? Going back to those days, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm probably spent, I feel, what do they say? I think it's like the industry average where people spend about 30 seconds to a minute. I generally spend a little bit on the higher end, but again, right, it's very like, it's always taken into the context of things, right? Like, hey, if they're all like product management resumes and I've seen a bunch of them, then I'm probably going to be like a better speed reader. By the way, if folks have not taken a speed reading course ever, like I actually encourage it. I took one when I was in college. It was amazing. That's how
speed reading course? There's a course specifically on how to optimize your speed reading.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, mine was more like a what we call a decal.
Okay.
When I was at Cal. It was just like a yeah, I know. It was a student-run course about like thinking about how to speed read, right? Just because you have a lot of textbooks that are generally like incredibly thick. It's just a lot of dense information, right? And you just want to like try and figure out the best way to like comprehend that information, right? Audiobooks weren't a big thing back, well, at least when I was in school, so I'm dating myself. But those types of things. But in this case, I do agree, right? It's like, hey, what do you want to highlight? I'm not saying that atmospheric pollutants aren't relevant to Facebook. I think image analysis is, right? Like, how do you think about image processing? A lot of those same applications can be used for Facebook. The thing about truncating a resume, it's just like, I don't knock people for having longer resumes. That's not a big thing. It's just like, if you could, it's probably nice because you just have a lot of space at the end. It's just like a formatting thing, right? Where it's like, hey, if you can't, no problem. If you could, it's probably a little nicer and a little cleaner, right? But that's just, again, it's an assumption more than anything else. But I think, again, right, my biggest thing around this resume is just like the order of what you're trying to convey, to your point about the relevancy, right? It's just making sure that's the focal point. But
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, so as the last part of today's session, is it the funnest part? It's probably the most critical part. Are you going to move forward with maybe actually before we go to the yes or nay for each resume? Can you summarize what you feel about the last resume? Generally, what are their strengths? What are some of the things that you might want to? I think we've talked about some of the ways that they might want to improve upon, but what are this person's strengths?
Well, I think these person's strengths, hey, going for your PhD in of itself is a feat, right? If I went through that much amount of school, that's incredible. I think the other things that are really like key, top of mind for this particular individual is like, look, clearly the type of work that you're doing is quite interesting in a sense of like, hey, it is generally geared more towards environmental studies, right? Like that's really interesting. They're using a lot of technology to advance these research topics, right? Those are the top of things that came out. I think there's probably what I would say is like very similar to the individual prior is like, hey, a social impact quality, right? But they also have showcased a lot of different types of work in their background, right? Like, hey, wireless sensor platforms, right? Efficiency in signal processing. It seems like a little bit more like hardware centric, right? So again, right, it just depends on what they are interested in and what they're striving for. But to me, this is like, hey, someone who's highly technical who wants to apply that to a variety of different apply their learnings to a variety of different like social impact like areas. That's what I gain.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay, so for the last part, I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but
no problem.
Yay or nay per resume, and then let's talk through them. So I have my own. I mean, we've only done 3, so I have written here, yay or nay per resume, but that's also my 2 cents. We can yeah.
I think like before we get there, yay or nay in what sense? Like if this was product management specific, or are we looking at just to
because let's look at product manager specific perspectives, just because I think that'll keep it quite consistent.
Okay, cool. Okay. All right.
If that's okay with you. If not,
that's fine. No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. I was just trying to think about the resumes I saw. I know it's only 3, but just like a quick refresh. But we can go through it. All right. For the first one, are you ready, or should I just say yay or nay?
I am ready.
Okay. The first one, I would say yay.
I agree. I have it here as well. I don't want to show you the other ones. Yeah, I have it yay as well.
Okay.
What makes this resume strong?
So this one is, it's super interesting, right? Like, again, right, analytical rigor is something I think lots of PMs will have, right? Or at least want to demonstrate and showcase. In addition to that, I think a few things that were super interesting is just this own personal consulting business that they ran. Like, hey, this top 150 student success podcast, X amount of downloads, 4.8. Like, hey, that's an incredible feat in of itself. Like running a business, if you treat it like a product, in which this individual did, right? It's quite like, hey, these are the types of things that we think about for the best PMs at Facebook, right? Self-starters. They've created things from scratch. They understand what it means to think about, a variety of scales, right? Not, I know Facebook is always known as like, hey, this incredibly large platform with billions of users. That's not where we started, right? We started from somewhere, and that somewhere is zero, right? And being able to understand that is incredible in the sense of where you want to go. Outside of that, I think, hey, of course, just the variety of background was quite interesting as well, right? I would love to see this person, if they were ever interested in RPM, if they ever went to like the social good team, right? Especially on our health team, where health is a very big area I think Facebook has to operate in. This would, I think they'd be able to add a lot of value if it all went well.
And I think it's quite consistent. It's not just one experience with analytical perspectives like numbers and measurement tools. It's consistent throughout most of their experiences. So that's one of the things that I really liked about the resume, the consistency of how they see their value in whatever professional experience they have. Awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. Next.
All right. Next. I was also yay here.
Oh, okay.
PM.
Okay, talk me through that.
Okay. So, reason why I would still want to talk to this person for PM, right? PMs come from a variety of different places, right? What you don't see as much, and which is also super interesting here, is that, hey, they haven't necessarily done a business type role yet, but that's probably what they're trying to break into. And I would like to at least understand that before necessarily saying yay or nay overall, right? I would still want to talk to this person because of two things. One, again, right, technical background is always great. That is probably like one of the more traditional senses of PM, right, of what you kind of see as a hallmark. The other thing that I think is super interesting here is data science, right? Very rare, like if you think of a PM that is a jack of all trades, right? A PM ideally has some technical background, but having a data science background is actually incredibly rare and potentially very valuable too, right? I mean, like, hey, it's, you have data science tools out there. There are certain PMs who work on that. There's also many different ways where a data science background could be a phenomenal PM at Facebook. And I would definitely want to talk to that individual, like in my mind, because of the types of things that I've seen at Facebook where that could be an incredibly relevant thing.
That's awesome. I love that. One of the things, so I've actually put nay. Here's proof. Here's proof. The reason I said nay, and this is why we have these discussions sometimes when you go through a reviewer, sometimes it's yay, sometimes it's nay, and we come from different backgrounds. So I want to put that out there. The reason I said nay was more because I didn't really get the link of why they want to go through to business. And I get you're going through an MBA, but was there an experience that led you to the MBA? I want to get a feel as to what your trajectory is. I actually do not like the fact that you kind of went from 2018 to 2019 and then 2018 to 2020. It's not that it's irrelevant. I just want to get to know what your drivers are. Why are you becoming a PM? And I think that's quite important to see whether or not you want to actually stay in PM. But that is just my 2 cents. I think in terms of how you've led a team, very indicative in the CenturyLink experience. Second bullet point, you led a team, and it's quite diverse in your project team. The first bullet point, you worked in 3 unique verticals, so you can work cross-functionally and across 2 different countries, which is great because when you're going for a global business, you're going to have to be working through many continents. So have an aspect of culture there is a really great thing to have. But I get your point. Well, I think I don't have that data science insight where it is quite rare, you're right, for a data scientist to want to go into a PM role. So love that insight. Last one.
All right. This one is probably really hard. Again, right, because I don't evaluate that many PhD candidate backgrounds. Um, I still say yay.
Okay.
But I'm going to
Okay.
caveat
Yes.
why.
Okay.
Like, if this individual applied to the program, you know, what we also ask in the, so I know, clearly I know a lot about RPM. When you apply to the RPM program, there's generally like a little piece of what why did you apply to the like we actually ask you to write something.
Yeah.
And if this individual applied, I would love to have read that. And I'm gonna make an assumption that they were very interested for a variety of reasons. I also want to talk to this person, should they have applied to the program, because very similar to data science, PhD candidates who turn PMs are rare. Right. We have a few, like, to be very fair, like, at Facebook and PMs, again, right, with the eclecticness of backgrounds, right, it's incredible of what you think you see versus actually what you get, right? Like, we have lawyers turn PMs, you have, again, online operations folks turn PMs, marketers turn PMs. We have a lot of differences, right? And so here, the way I read this resume, more importantly than not, I think this is an individual who has probably done very well in school, right, who has learned a lot and wants to try and learn learn what they can out of a program. And I would love to talk to them for that fact alone, right? Like, generally speaking, again, right, when you think about a diversity of background, like, hey, someone who has worked on this type of work, you generally don't see, right? Like, this is an atypical background applicant to the background. I'm gonna, again, it's probably confirming my own assumptions or seeing what this individual really wants out of the program, but I would ideally want to chat with them and at least have a conversation, right, to make sure there's like mutual interest. But for me,
I agree.
Is it atypical that I probably said yes? Yeah, it probably is. But again, right, when you're thinking about the lens of the types of profiles and the backgrounds that you want to bring in, like, hey, this would be, I think, again, a very great addition to the team in a very different way, right? Like, this person could be working on climate change at Facebook, which is something we're thinking about, right? Again, right, context being like, hey, I've been at Facebook for a while. I can see where someone might want to go with this background, but I wouldn't rule it out, right? Right off the bat.
I love the perspective on how you're able to. I feel like one of the misconceptions with talent acquisition is you're there to stop people from bad talent from getting in. Where I think as you're going through these, you're like a blocker. You're an obstacle that people have to get through.
Yeah.
But it seems
I think that's fair.
I think as you're reviewing these resumes, you gave a perspective as to, okay, well, I get it, but there has to be a bit of context and I see where this person's going. And I think the fact that you're able to let's say that there's a PM role for this very specific AI position, or working in VR, right? Maybe there's no direction to climate change, and what you might be able to do is direct them towards the right area. And that's where I see that you're not really I feel like you're not really an obstacle. You're really a helper to help folks maneuver into Facebook. Where are the right positions, etc. So, but maybe one of the questions I had is, what's the top misconception about talent acquisition? I don't want to ask you that yet, just because I know we're a bit over time. Okay. So what I'd like to do for the last part of this discussion is, typically I like asking around top 3 things that you've rejected resumes, but I think what we've talked about today was so insightful that folks, if you're on the line, be sure to implement on some of the things that we've noticed through resumes. I guess one of the things that it seems that Facebook is quite unique in the fact that it accepts a lot of diverse talent. So it's okay to have non-relevant experience. Don't use it as kind of a crutch. Use it as a thing that you pride yourself in, because that is you, and this is your trajectory in getting a PM role. The last question, feel free to stop sharing your screen, by the way.
Oh, okay. Let's see, stop presenting. There we go.
Okay. Actually, you know what? I am going to ask that question. What do you feel is the top misconception around talent acquisition, and how would you like to address it?
This one's a hard one. Here's the thing I would say about talent acquisition, right? And I think you've noted about it earlier, which is our like the barrier piece, right? I think that there's two ways to think about it, right? Like, because Facebook, there, if you kind of think about recruiting as a whole, right? There's probably two ways to think about it, right? Inbound and outbound. Inbound being like, hey, you have your traditional applicants, mm-hmm. Or outbound being like what you would maybe call, well, now I'm really dating myself, like a headhunter, right? I think the biggest misconception is where we play a role in helping someone, right? I think a lot of days now, especially on LinkedIn, recruiters like to call themselves matchmakers, right? Which I think is a much better, term, right? I think that a lot of misconceptions around recruiting is like, hey, we're there to like make a quick buck and move on, right? Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm not saying that it can't happen. I think that if you happen to work with the, again, I would probably say here, caveat with assume positive intent, which is, hey, you're working with someone who wants to help you find something better. That is the ultimate goal, right? Like, we don't want to be a barrier to that. All we are doing is, hey, if we believe that this is a great opportunity for you to explore, that's what we want, right? Yeah. And I think that, that's the ideal goal. Of course, does that happen for everyone, or has there been bad experiences recorded? Of course, like I would almost, it's unfortunate, but it happens. But outside of that, I think, being a barrier is not ideally not what we want, right? We want to, again, the goal, at least what we pride ourselves at Facebook is, hey, we want to consider everybody, right? With a consistency and fairness across all. I think the other piece that is probably really hard, which is like TBD, like per individual, is like the compensation piece, where, I think a lot of folks believe that recruiters are out there to like lowball individuals. In my experience, that's not what I want to have happen, right? Like, of course, there can be misconceptions of that, which are really tough, but my goal is not to do that. I think like, if you're a great recruiter who is really looking out both for, the company and the candidate that you represent, your goal is to make sure there's, ideally a great piece for both sides, right? Now, again, right, that might feel like a low ball to some, depending on the circumstance. Like, I just don't know. But the reality being is like, hey, if you're great, and of course, Facebook does pay very well. So I'm in a position where I can say this, like, hey, I don't want to do that to anyone. I would ideally like to give you an offer that you're incredibly happy about. It makes the decision a lot easier. You want to start off with the right foot, right? And I hope that, especially now with labor laws changing, et cetera, where you don't ask for previous pay, et cetera, right? My hope and my recommendation for folks on the line is just be upfront with what you want and why, right? Mm-hmm. Give an explanation. Like, it's hard for any individual to understand like an ask without a rationale. Mm-hmm. And as long as you provide good rationale why, and again, assuming positive intent, I'm sure that the recruiter that you're working with will want to at least ask on your behalf versus not at all. Because, hey, what do they say? You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? Like, that's kind of like the idea, right? Like, hey, just be honest, be open. If you can articulate why, then great, yeah.
So it's okay to give a high number and then justify it afterwards. And I completely agree with you. You know your value. The worst thing that can happen is you give Walt a number you're okay with, and then you go through the whole interview process and you're like, nah, never mind, this is not what I want, Like, this is not the compensation package I was expecting for.
Well, yeah, that would be really bad. Yeah. That would, like, because I would have liked, well, there are two parts. I would have liked to have a conversation about like, hey, why would you, one, tell me this was not great when you had said yes to begin with, right? If things change, just be open, right? Hey, anything can change at any time, right? The other piece I think is, with this particular misconception around like compensation, right? The goal is, of course, to try and make everyone happy, right? That doesn't, it's not always the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, if you've been as open with the individual that you're working with, they will be as open with you about that, right? Because if there's a mismatch, the last thing I would think is like someone is going to try and recruit you, with a very large gap in expectations, right? Or at least we don't want that to happen. Now, again, does it happen? Probably. But our goal is to try and reduce that outcome to a very small minimum.
Yeah, and I think there are other ways. By the way, speaking of negotiation, I want to impart this knowledge for you guys. There's going to be an offer package for those who haven't entered industry. There's for offer packages usually, yes, obviously there's a salary, there's the benefits, 401k, health benefits, but you also need to think about each role as a stepping stone. So sometimes I've seen folks actually take a salary cut if they're able to progress further. So one of the negotiation tactics I've seen, and I love this, like, I love this one. Okay, you fight for the, you obviously fight for the compensation, but the second thing you can negotiate is, I want direct exposure to the director, or something where it's easy for Facebook to give or easy for the company to give, but something that's invaluable to you. So just be sure to have some of these tactics in mind when you're talking. Maybe it's not a conversation with Walt. It might be something that you want to have with the hiring manager, perhaps, if you have that opportunity. But it's something that I've noticed is something to be very worthwhile if you feel like you can't budge on compensation. Not with Walt, but maybe with some other companies as well. Since we're on the
That's
topic of negotiation too.
that's an interesting call out.
Yeah.
I would probably say this, right? Now, everyone, this is what I've always thought through, right? Everyone is in a different place financially,
Mm-hmm.
right? You all have different lifestyles that you would like to live, and there's of course a financial component to that to maintain that. Taking a salary cut is a very personal thing, right? Whether or not you accept it or not. Again, to your point, some people take it with a potential trade-off of like, hey, I'll make it back sooner rather than, ideally later. Maybe there's like something I can do in terms of mentorship or visibility, right,
Yeah.
to progress in my career. Um, you know, I, just my thought there is like, hey, whatever that trade-off is for yourself, right? Whether, just do your best to be consistent around the decision-making process, and make sure that, you can weigh it well, right? Because not everything has a tangible weight, right? To your point, right? Compensation is something a little bit more finite. Career progression is not always like that, right? It's not a lot, generally speaking, career progression is not very one directional, right? Generally, it's like a wavy type of a thing.
Yeah.
But with that said, hey, again, it's to each their own, right? It just depends on what you value at that moment. I encourage you to, for anyone who's listening on this call, to like, if you're in that situation, just have an honest conversation with yourself about it. And it's okay to be like unsure, but make sure you have an honest conversation about what you truly value in that moment, because that is going to be the defining moment and the choice, because ideally that will, bring you the happiness or whatever you are looking for, right?
Cool. Awesome. There are a lot more questions. At Van Delay, I see your question. I know we're 15 minutes over, guys, and I'm appreciative of those who are calling in internationally. It's the wee hours of the night, and you're still on this call, so kudos to you. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually close this call, and I see a lot of questions are on there. What we'll do is we'll have either a post around some of the topics that we've seen on the chat today, and we'll address it through LinkedIn. Friendly reminder, please post your favorite quote. I do want to have this other conversation with you guys offline, and would love to involve Walt in this conversation too. So looking forward to some of your favorite quotes. I know I have a couple of them that I'll share after this call. Any last words for the viewers today, Walt?
Well, thank you so much for attending. I didn't know there were international folks, so thank you for waking up super early, or if it's really late your time, thank you for attending. And I hope that you felt that this was valuable. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Walt. All right, take care, guys. Bye.